Thank you for being here for our creating custom task type. My name is Gregg Hart, and we're going to go ahead and start. So custom task types. We have a number of task types that are in the system out of the box, as you all should know. There is unlimited freedom to create your own custom task types. And these can be created such that you want them to trigger automatically by adding is what we call triggering events, or they can be manually added to a docket. And we're going to talk about both ways on how that works. An important thing to note is that you must be an account admin or an account admin backup to manipulate custom tasks. Now, that is a requirement because it's something that's very powerful, but if you start changing existing stuff, it can break a lot of things. So you've got to be an admin. To get to this area, you're going to hover over tasks, and there is a manage task types section. And if we click on that, we get a list of every type of task in the system. And depending on your account, you may have not much more than 150 or so, or you could have significantly larger number, just depending on if anything's been created ahead of time or beforehand. And there's two main events that can be used to trigger a custom task type. And again, by triggering, there's something that you've entered into a task type that would cause it to generate automatically. And those are matter-based triggers or task-based triggers. And by matter-based triggers, I'm referring to something that would generate when a date changes, as an example. So when you file an application, as soon as you enter a filing date into that matter, we're going to generate a number of docketing items or tasks such as file assignments, file power of attorney, file initial IDS, file for an application. These are all examples of tasks that are generated because the filing date changes. Other examples are when an allowance date is entered into a matter, we're going to generate your pay issue fee and your respond to notice of allowance. When an issue date is added to a matter, we're going to generate your maintenance fees. So those are examples of tasks being generated when something happens to the underlying matter. You can also set up something else besides dates. So when the client changes, for example, you might generate a task, or if a paralegal is added to the matter, you could generate a task. The other type is task-based triggering. So a perfect example is when an office action is mailed and that's received into AppColl, we're going to generate a respond to office action. And that's because something happened to a task, and in this case, a task being created. You might also have a triggering event when a task is completed, do something else, generate a new task because something was completed. And then another great example of task-based triggering is extendable deadlines. So if you get your 3-month respond to non-final date, if you need an extension, you would mark that as missed, and then we'll generate your 4-month date. And mark your 4-month as missed, we'll generate the 5-month date, and so on. Those are examples of tasks being changed to a different status that triggers another task to be created. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a basic task type that has no triggers. It's just going to be something that would be manually added to a docket. And we're going to add a new one, which is you just click on this add button. So this is a task type definition page, and we'll cover most of this stuff as we go further in. But to create a custom task type, all you really need to do is give it a title. Client reporting letter, non-final OA. Next, you're going to pick who's going to own this task. And it may be the attorney is going to be responsible for this. It may be a paralegal, or maybe you have an individual in your firm or your corporation that always handles something like this. So you can pick different types of who's going to own the task. The next is, what type of deadline is it? Normally this sending a client reporting letter would probably be more like an internal deadline. And now we're going to just click save. Okay, so now we have a new task type, client reporting letter. And again, we haven't added any triggering events to it. So this would have to be added manually to a docket. So I'm going to go out to the matters and I'm going to put in a specific CL005. Sorry about that. And we've just got a basic matter here. And to add a task, add our new task to it, it's just clicking the add task for matter button. It's going to populate our client matter, and we're going to scroll down and pick client reporting letter. It should fill out your dates based on what we selected and the task type. I'll explain more about how the dates work, but by default, it's just going to create it with today's date. And again, the owner is the matter attorney. And now we just click save. So now we've got an open task, client report letter, non-final office action. And as you probably already know, you don't have to create the task from within the matter. From the task side, you can also just click add. The only difference is you have to populate a client and optionally a matter before you pick your client report letter. All right, so that is the basic way to create custom task types. There's going to be instances where it would always be added manually, so you don't need to have events that trigger this to create automatically. And that's how you do it, very simple. Now we're going to add some triggers to this client reporting letter so it can generate automatically. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to delete our client reporting letter task because we're going to have it auto-generate. And I'm going to open this back up, the one that we already worked on. First, I'm going to put in reporting. And the place that you create triggering events to make this generate automatically is right here, trigger events. And this can be a little daunting when you first see it, but it's something that you're just going to play with and get it to work with the way you need, and over time it's just going to start making more sense. But when you click on the drop down, there's a whole bunch of things that can trigger a task to generate. The ones that are most common are when a specific field in a matter changes. For example, when a filing date changes, or the allowance date, or the issue date changes. So for example, when a specific field in any matter changes, and then you would pick, for example, filing date. So that'll be a trigger if the filing date changes. And you're going to get a drop down of all the types of tasks that exist in the system. Since we're doing a reporting letter, when a non-final office action is created, we're going to scroll down to respond to non-final when a specific task is created. Okay, a couple ways we're going to do dates for this. So we're going to say what the due date is, the response date, and there's different ways to refer to what the date's going to be. We can have the date be when the task is created. We can have it be a whole bunch of different examples. So maybe we're using the matter issue date as the date that something is going to have, the task is going to have its due date. We can use priority dates, publication dates. What we're going to use here is the task, the triggering task respond by. So the date that the task is due. Okay, so if we leave this as is, triggering task respond by, and save this, whenever the office action is due, so if we got an office action was mailed today, the due date's going to be January 14th of 2022. If we leave this as is, this task, the client reporting letter, isn't going to have a due date until 1/14/2022. We don't want that. We want this to be due much earlier. So what we can do is we can offset this by months or days. So for example, we're going to offset this by 2 months and let's say 20 days. So what this is meaning is if the office action is due in 3 months, we want this client reporting letter to be due 2 months and 20 days earlier. So basically 10 days from now. So that's one way you can do respond by date. The next thing I want to show you is that we don't have to use the respond by date. We can use, for example, the receive non-final office action. Okay, so you may know that when an office action is mailed and we receive that into the system, Regenrate a receive non-final office action. And the due date for that is the day it's created. It's an event. There's no action to do on it. It's just letting you know that we received the office action. If we use that, we would change this to the triggering task reference date, which is the date this was received. And then we would just change this to 10 days. So this would be due 10 days after the receive non-final was added to the system. So just showing you how we could use the respond to non-final and subtract 2 months and 20 days, or use the receive non-final and just add 10 days to it. So you can go either way. As long as you're checking your dates properly, you should be good to go. Now I'm going to click Save. We can populate different forms that require a DocuSign signature, and you can send those forms via email to inventors. For example, they would use the DocuSign interface where they would e-sign those, and then they would come back into AppColl, and you can track basically for given applications what documents you have received and which ones are still outstanding. Okay, we're going to now go back to the matter that we generated the reporting letter for. You may remember I deleted that task. So we're going to simulate receiving a office action into the system. So I'm going to add task for matter. And what we're going to choose is receive non-final office action. Okay, and we're going to put in today's date as when we receive it. And then we're going to click Save. Yes, somebody had suggested the status was abandoned. And in case you didn't know, there in the settings, if you go to the gear icon into settings, there is an option to turn off task generation if the status of an application is, for example, abandoned or expired or lapsed, something like that. So that's what I had in place. So that's why the client reporting letter didn't generate or the respond to non-final. So thank you for those that pointed out that. Okay, wanted to also point out how we had the date offset by 10 days. So the office action was received today, but the due date for the reporting letter is 10 days later, which is what we had put in to the task type, is an offset of 10 days. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to a more complex example, and we will create a foreign annuity payment task type. It's a made-up foreign annuity, but it's going to trigger when the filing date changes, and then it's going to have every year after the annuity is paid, when you pay it, it'll generate the next year and the next year and the next year. I know there's some countries out there that do very similar. I believe Canada is one of them. that has annuity set up when the filing date, when it's filed, and then you pay annual annuity after the filing date. So we're going to set up and use an example like that. I got a question. The customization I will add, will they be reflected work for all users? Yes, these are global changes. So if you add a new task type, it's going to trigger for all users. All right, so we're going to go create a new task type. We're going to click add. We're going to do pay for an annuity. I don't know 100% if Canada does it this way, but we're going to use Canada as an example. So we're going to say pay for an annuity. We're going to do attorney for matter. This is a hard deadline. There's, basically you got to pay this. Hard external deadline. Now we're going to add some triggering events. We'll worry about the dates later. We're going to add a trigger event. And we're going to say when a specific field in a matter changes. And it makes sense to go through all these when statements, getting an idea of what kind of things that can be used to trigger different tasks. So we're going to use when a specific field in a matter changes, and we're going to use filing date. Okay, so we have when the filing date in a matter changes. Now we can't stick with just that because that means any type of matter this is going to trigger for. So we need to further narrow this by both type and country. So next we're going to click add again. After you've created a when statement, you're going to have options for while statements. So when is when some event occurs, and while is when existing conditions exist. And again, there's a lot of them. It just makes sense to scroll through this and see what kind of options we have for while statements. But we're going to say while a specific field in the matter contains a specific value. This is probably the most common that you use. Specific field in the matter contains a specific value. And what we're going to say is type. And we're going to put in utility foreign. We only want types that have utility foreign. The next thing is, since we're simulating that this is for Canada, we're going to go ahead and use the same while statement. While a specific field in the matter contains a specific value, and we're going to use country. I'm going to use country code, which is the 2-digit WIPO codes. And we're going to say CA. So when you're using the when and then whiles after it, you can see they're indented. So when the filing date changes, when the type is utility foreign and the country code contains CA. Okay, so those are our triggers that we have. I'm going to apply changes. Make sure we save this. Now we're going to worry about dates. And I mentioned that there's a number of things that your reference date can be based off of. If you think about it, we're doing this annuity based on the filing date. So we're going to use the matter filing date. If we leave this alone without any offsets, this is going to be due the day the application is filed, which we don't want. We're presuming that this is due a year after it's filed. So we're going to put in an offset of 12 months. Now we're going to click apply changes. We're going to go to a specific matter. We're going to use CL01CA. Okay, so for this we have Canada is the country, we have type utility foreign, and we have no filing date. So I'm going to put in a filing date of today. Now you have to click apply changes. It won't generate it without the record being saved. Now we've got our pay for an annuity, CA, with a due date of a year out from today's date. Now, if you subsequently change the filing date again, let's say we change it to tomorrow, that will generate another one of these with a due date of 10/15/2022. So just be aware that it can change if you change the filing dates. So this is all fine and dandy, but we're presuming that Canada requires you to pay this every year. So if I mark this as completed, nothing's going to happen. It's going to close this out. It won't generate a second one. And that's what we want to occur. So we're going to go back to our task type, and we're going to do a little bit of fancy magic here. We're going to add another trigger that I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to click add. Now we're still stuck with while statements, and we want to basically do when filing date changes or something else occurs. So to do that, you're going to click on the checkbox right here, add another when condition, ORed with the previous event. So now we've got whens again, and we're going to say when a specific task completes with a given state. And you'll see in a second what I'm doing here. What I'm saying is when the pay for an annuity task completes with a given state, and I'm picking completed. Okay, so now we've got our new OR in here. So this is adding a trigger that if I go mark this as completed, it'll generate another pay forward annuity. And then if I mark that as completed, it'll generate another one. It's similar to trademark, your statement of continued uses that have to be paid every 10 years. It's a similar idea to that. Now, if I leave this as is, it's going to generate that second one with a filing date offset by 12 months, which means every one of these is going to be due a year after the filing date. But we want this to be due a year after the first one was due. So every year on the anniversary, we're paying a new one. Now, this is something that's not used that often, but I want to show you one of the more complex options. And we're going to say, use the matter filing date, or if later. Now we've got another section here. And we're going to say the triggering task respond by date, offset by 12 months. So what this is doing now, again, just it's a little complex, but I want to give you a good example of how this works. So when the filing date changes, like we did here, it's going to generate our first pay for an annuity that's due a year later. What we want to happen next is when we mark this as completed, we want it to generate another one that is due in 2023, and so on and so forth. So that's why we're saying, or if later, which it's always going to be later if we're doing it based on when this is completed. We're saying whatever the due date of the first pay for an annuity, we want to add another 12 months to it. I hope that's clear. All right, now we're going to click Apply Changes again, and we're going to test this out. We're going to mark this as completed. So this is now marked completed, and by it being marked that way, we generated a new pay for an annuity with a due date of 2023. And same thing, if we mark this as completed, it'll generate one as 2024. Now, let's say that this case, whatever, went abandoned, or you're not going to pursue it anymore, and you don't want to keep having pay for an annuity tasks. If you mark this open one as not needed, we won't generate additional ones. And the reason for this is we said when a pay for an annuity task completes with the completed state. So we could have just said when a specific task completes. But when you're using that trigger event, any status that's not open is considered complete. So if you say missed or not needed or completed, it all falls under that task completes. And since we don't want it to generate another one when we pick not needed, that's why we're using when it completes with a given state of completed. All right, the next thing I want to do is talk about when these new tasks generate. Nothing generates retroactively, and that is on purpose. If you created a new task type that you think does a certain thing and it does something different, if it applied retroactively to everything, you can end up with hundreds or thousands of tasks that you did not want created. So there's a way to force a new task type to apply retroactively. And I'm going to go through explaining how that works. But I just want to make very clear, when you are creating custom task types, you want to test this in every scenario. Create a test matter, put in values for it, and do what I did here. Filing date, we added in a filing date in this trigger. I set this up to work with Canada. I recommend changing country to something else and adding the filing date in and make sure it doesn't generate, because it should only generate for Canada. Same with type, put in a type of utility non-provisional. Make sure that doesn't generate the task. So it's very important to test this thoroughly before you start making new task types. All right, so there's two ways to apply tasks retroactively, and they are called regenerating tasks. And there is two ways to do that. One is to regenerate tasks at the task level, and one is at the matter level. So regenerating tasks simulates the matter or the tasks at issue as being created from scratch. So as if they didn't already exist. And we're going to begin with the one we already used. Okay, this was it. So we've got our client reporting letter, and I'm going to delete it because we're going to presume that we want this to apply retroactively. So we've already got our receive. We don't have a respond to client reporting letter right now, but we want that to show up automatically. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out to our tasks, and I'm going to filter for that CL matter. CL0005. Yeah, let's go ahead and let's delete our respond to non-final too. Now I'm going to do all tasks because we want to get to our receive non-final. Okay, so we know that the receive non-final is what triggers our client reporting letter. And again, we're presuming that we want to apply this retroactively. We're going to highlight the receive non-final, and we're going to click regenerate tasks. And this is simulating the receive non-final as being created. Even though it already exists, it's simulating it being created. So we're going to click regenerate tasks. And that created our client reporting letter and our respond to non-final. So an example of when you might use this is, again, let's say that you just created a client reporting letter task that's going to, in the future, moving forward, it's going to generate when you receive non-final office actions. But you may have 50 existing matters where you want this to generate. The best way to do it is to filter for all received non-final office actions, which again is in the all tasks, not all open, because the receive is an event which closes automatically. Filter for all those, check the box to highlight them all, and click Regenerate Tasks. That's one way to use Regenerate Tasks. The other is to do it at the matter level, which we're going to go ahead and do. For here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to delete all of our annuity payments, apply changes. So if you remember, the annuity payments are generated when the filing date changes, but we already have a filing date. So we want these to apply. We want to apply this retroactively. So what we can do is click Regenerate Tasks. We're in the matter, click Regenerate Tasks, and there we go. A couple questions I have. Will the Regenerate Tasks option duplicate the office action deadline tasks? So that's a great question. If you remember in the example when we generated tasks on the client reporting letter, that was based on the receive non-final office action. And the receive non-final is also going to generate the respond to non-final 3-month deadline. It will not cause duplicates because that task type has a checkbox to not allow duplicates. So you should be set there. Another question, what about for an annuity example? Wouldn't regenerating tasks based on the filing date result in extra tasks being generated besides the annuity? Another excellent question. So we just did the regenerate tasks on this here. If there were other tasks that generated on other dates, such as filing date, or perhaps allowance or issue date, if there's other tasks that could generate based on those, they would generate in the matter, but it will not create duplicates. Unless the definition of the task type specifically allows duplicates, you should not end up with any duplicates. And I'll go ahead and point that out and show you. Let's look at, just grab any old task here. So there's a generate task, even if a task with the same name, matter, and response date already exists. So this is turned off by default for everything, so it'll not create duplicates. It's if you checked and turned that on that you would end up with a duplicate situation. So that is all I have today. So I'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you all for your time. I hope this was helpful.